We are recording. Thanks so much.
Well, I'm Paul Troyer, coordinator of MP50, and I'd like to thank all of you for attending and welcome. It's good to see such an excellent turnout. I'm really happy to have two guest speakers today. And I want to give them time to present and then respond to questions. And the way we're running this meeting is we want to give people opportunity to speak also. And so this will be recorded so we can, people can listen to it afterwards. But again, I want to thank everybody for being here. The spirit of MP50 is for openness and diverse points of view. I think the challenge of developing a long-term plan for Minnesota Point is going to require some outside of the box thinking. And so we really welcome challenging questions, diverse viewpoints, new ideas, and it'll take multiple ideas to identify ways to make the point resilient, flooding, and to erosion in the years ahead. So again, thank you very much for attending. I do want to give a shout out of thanks. Councilor Roz Randolph has been very supportive, as our Senator Jen McEwen. And so we really appreciate the support in moving this ahead. So the agenda is, first of all, Don Buck, President of Port Point Community Club, will make a few comments. And then Diane Desotelle will talk about the planning document, which we sent out ahead of time for people to look at. She'll respond to questions and to comments. And then after Diane's part of the agenda, then Nick Zager from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers will do a short presentation, but primarily respond to questions and comments about the Section 111 study. So again, thank you everybody for attending. You may want to mute yourself until you speak, but we definitely want to hear what you have to say. And so take it off mute later on. You can put your hand up if you want to talk. Each speaker can identify how they want comments during their presentation. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dawn for a few comments. Thank you, Dawn.
Thanks everybody so much for being here. I want to really appreciate your time and really reiterate what Paul said. We need great questions. We need everyone to engage on this very serious issue that's come in front of us again. MP50 is a committee of the Park Point Community Club, which was established in 1889 and has a rich history of stewardship and engagement and partnership with the City of Duluth and many agencies. And we want to continue those relationships moving forward. There's a rich history of cultural diversity, great historical perspectives. Park Point is a shared asset for all the Twin Ports. The purpose of the Park Point Community Club is to work for the betterment of the community and the welfare of its residents. For decades, residents, like I said, have worked on stewardship projects. Many of you on this screen have been involved for decades, trying to address these issues of resiliency. And now these new issues have been taken to a new level with the challenges presented by climate change. So we are going to need all hands on deck to address these very complex problems. And I do thank Councilor Roz Randolph for her support. As Paul mentioned, Senator Jen McEwen for their continued support of where we need this to go this time. And I'm so excited to have the Corps of Engineers, Nick Zager here, starting with that Section 111 study, the third study that I'm aware of. And we really want this to go somewhere this time. So Park Pointers are really dedicated. I feel we have an effort to really get this thing launched, and not just the two ends of Park Point, but a comprehensive solution for the whole barrier of island of Minnesota Point. So thank you all so much for your engagement. And one of my missions is to help educate, help get as many people involved. Because I said we'll need great science, great minds, and everybody working together asking great questions. So thanks so much, Diane, for your work on this project. I know you've said the city is committed to moving forward this time, and we'll look forward to hearing more on that. All right, thanks much.
Thank you very much, Don, for those comments. Our next speaker is Diane Desotelle. She's the Duluth Natural Resources Coordinator. She's been working on this committee for about 3 months in terms on the part of the city developing the Minnesota Point 50-year resiliency planning process. And from my perspective, from Park Point, she's listened very well to input from the community, and she's been flexible in developing this document. I know it's a document that's in process, but I really appreciate the spirit and the working style that you've brought to this project. So thank you very much. I'll turn it over to Diane for maybe a few comments, but primarily to respond to questions and comments.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm really excited to see the number of people online. I guess what I should do is give you a little context of how we developed this 3-pager, I'd like to call it. We've got a number of things that are kind of coming together, right? We've got about a year ago, the mayor sent a letter to the Corps of Engineers requesting that see if they could do what we call a Section 111 study, which Nick Zager will be talking about in a minute. And that study is related to the federal infrastructure and, taking a look more at the science and implications related to that, related to sediment and that infrastructure. In relation to that, we want to try to understand if the studies in the past, how much things have changed, and if there's any data and information that we need to help us better understand what's going on to move forward with the planning component. So it's like almost, what comes first? Really, if you start planning before you really have all the information and the data, it's difficult because you just start asking questions that maybe we can't answer. There will be some questions we can't answer at all, but at least by joining these efforts together and intertwining the science and the modeling with the planning process, we can at least try to make sure when we're doing the science, we're asking the questions as best we can to think about level of risk and other issues. So in relation to that, then we want to integrate that long-term planning process that Paul's been doing such a great job leading the MP50 group on. So what we did is we brought a small group of people together from Park Point Community Club, from the science community, from the Corps of Engineers, because they'll be doing the Section 11 study, to put together this document that Paul sent out to you to look at. This is a work in progress. We're adapting as we go, but we thought it would be good to have some goals, some rough strategies, and try to start to outline a timeline so we can be realistic about when we're getting information in, when we need to try to seek out funding to move forward with the planning. If you go too soon for funding and you're not ready, then you might be ready to plan before you have the information you need. So the goal of this document is just that, to really have our to-do list, try to stay on track and adapt it as we go. So this is what we have right now. We want to keep sharing it now with the community as we move forward. And at this point, I'm sure open for any questions or comments you have on what we have at this point. I guess you can just feel free to, I don't know, Paul, you might want to monitor this or not, but people can probably, we've got a small enough group, you could just unmute yourself and we'll see what happens.
Yes, I think it's a small enough group. Just unmute yourself if you have comments or questions for Diane.
Diane, this is Keith McLaughlin.
Yes, go ahead.
I guess my question is, at the end of the day, when this report is produced, who is the audience?
Are we talking about the plan, the MP50 portion, or are we talking about the Section 111 study that Nick's going to be talking about?
I think I'm referring more to the MP50 plan.
well, the city, the whole community is the audience.
Okay, I guess when I've written reports, I'm always kind of focused on who is going to be the audience and what kind of things I
Right.
would put in a report to appeal to their interests.
Right. Right. There's technical stuff that won't, that is not, it is important. It's important for us to be able to take the technical stuff and put it in language for the general public. And of course, city council to review and understand, and for those presentations to happen to the community, because the community is going to have to make decisions and prioritize our work across the city about how things happen related to Park Point, related to climate change. Yes, Park Point is a very, very important component of the city, but climate change resiliency is important in all of the neighborhoods and communities across the city. And prioritizing this work is just as important as work in Hillside area, or West Duluth, East Duluth.
Okay, I guess what I'm hearing is that we need to have the technical content in there, but have it written at a more layman level.
Right. I think, with any planning process, I'm just in the process of completing the natural resource management program plan. In general, more of the technical people are using it, but we also have a component of it that we're trying to make it user friendly for the general public to look at it at a different level than us. And then you can always go deep if you need to.
Okay,
it's kind of that silo effect, right?
Yep, great.
Yeah, Diane, we touched briefly on this the last time this working group met. Administrations change, department heads leave. How will the city provide assurances that something will happen this time?
That's a difficult question for me to answer as a staffer, except that the better we do at documenting what we do, how we do it, and making sure somebody from the city, which we are committed to, be involved all the way through. As many of you know, it will not be me, because I am resigning April 1st, and it has nothing to do with working with the city. It's just personal reasons. But we're in transition. But that doesn't mean we've got good people that'll come on, and we've got people that understand where those connections are. So no, we're committed to doing it, but we're also committed to doing it from the city. Park Point, we want to have Park Point Community Club have every much's input on the process, and they are much larger stakeholders than maybe somebody in the far east end or the far west end, but we're all stakeholders in this. And so this has to be a citywide process, because it's part of city budgeting, it's part of city prioritization and strategies moving forward.
All right, thank you.
I'm going to just add to this is just, you guys, this is just really exciting times. I think there's a lot of opportunity here for funding with just a lot of stuff that's been going on, not only federally speaking, but on the state level. And we should be really excited about moving forward with this next phase of getting the Section 1, starting to get these conversations going. And then the next phase of looking for funding to put a plan together that has that discussion about alternatives, risk, and really have some heart-to-heart discussions about what's affordable on a long term, and that's meets a consensus with what we think we can strategize moving forward. I think there will be a lot of tools in the toolbox to use, but it's going to be, it's hard to predict what's going to happen, and it's hard to get a sense of level of risk when it comes to different parts of properties or sections along the point. And those conversations are going to have to be real, and we need to be really thoughtful about this long term. It's hard for humans to think long term. We want to just fix it tomorrow. And we're talking generational. So, Park Corners need to think about the next generations of people moving forward related to private property, as well as the city thinking about the public component of it.
Diane, this is Pat Sterner. Are there any initial projected costs for this? You're talking about looking for funding sources and the potential for that, and understanding the long-term nature of this from the outset, at least in the shorter term. What's sort of the projected cost here, and where is that funding going to come from?
Well, that's what we're trying to get our arms around, Pat, when we move forward with this next phase of the work. Because, there's alternatives are everything from do nothing to do this big, huge infrastructure project or hardcore stuff, of which maybe the Corps would have some funding, but the city will have to commit to something no matter what. And can they? There have been studies in the past and nothing moved forward.
Right.
And then also getting the funding for the planning component, I don't expect that to cost, a huge amount, but we do need to find a grant that'll do that. And we have a couple grant options that we think will be successful, but we want to time that. And in the schedule, we kind of laid it out to start looking for grants, I think in like June or July of this year, so that we could be ready for the planning component by later in this year, when we feel like we have more of the science and more of those techie discussions well underway.
Okay, thank you. That was my other question, sort of the timing for getting to the next phase.
Yeah, so if you kind of look at pages 4 and 5 on that document, it's tried to lay out a rough schedule. And I'm a advocate of lay something out, just put something on paper so that we can start to think about our goals and strategies. It's not perfect, but we are at least trying to block out, okay, about here, we should be about, ready to move on to this piece. And it also helps us try to keep everybody on track. There's always some delay, but let's do our best to stick with the schedule we got laid out.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Gary Glass here. Can I add something?
Hi, Gary.
The fact that we're working on a plan is an interesting challenge, because it seems that the city ought to have had a plan all of these years, where by inviting 6 million visitors to come in the summertime and the come to Duluth, that plan should have accommodated or have means to accommodate those kind of invitations to the visitors coming to Duluth. And particularly, they come to see the lake and enjoy the environment. So the plan clearly needs to have some type of a permanent implementation facet to it, where there is a permanent city committee that deals with the specifics of this barrier island it's not being dealt with now. And an example of that would be the fact that it's only been 3 or 4 years since we've had a city maintained access point at 12th to the beach, when there needs to be one on a number of other places where the public accesses the beach and needs to be accommodated and supported, and they're not being supported now. So that's just a small example of the kinds of things that need to be done that aren't being done. And the absence of a plan without some permanent implementation to carry out the plan over time seems to be a missing component at present. So I'll stop there.
One sec.
Thank you for your comment. I'm not sure if you had a question for me on that, but that comment's appreciated with planning in general across the city. We're about to kick off the first ever natural resources management program plan. We never had a natural resources program in the city either. So I think, I hear you.
So some part of that plan has to be a permanent way to implement it.
Yep, which means funding and staff.
Right. And even appropriate legal format to make it part of the city charter. I don't think it's in the city charter now, is it?
I'm not sure what you'd be asking for to go into the city charter. That would be different than what we have now.
Well,
That Park
something,
Point would be
something that
spelled
makes
out.
it, something that implements, manages and implements the plans for the whole natural resources of the city. That, you know, that it's just catch as catch can, it seems, you know, what's
Yeah.
available and so on. And
Yeah.
there needs to be some more forward thinking part of the process that would include that.
I think those are good comments to bring to your decision makers, to the mayor, to management. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this is Roz Brander. If I can maybe jump in on that as well. First of all, thank everyone who's part of this committee. It's awesome work you're doing. I know Paul and Don and everyone and Manager Desotelle have done a ton of work here. On Monday, February 14th, we'll actually be hearing some reporting back from our climate action planning that the city is doing. Again, it kind of ties into a little bit what Dr. Glass is talking about, and that is, what is the long-term planning? What are we doing? Because a lot of what's going on in Park Point, we know is driven by the climate change situation. So I encourage everyone to dial into that, to hear on Monday at 6 o'clock on the 14th what those plans are. And I certainly, as your representative, will be pushing for what we can do for specifically Park Point. But yeah, I agree. We need to have plans. We need to have it measurable. But I think the city assigning Manager Desotelle to this is showing in good faith that this is on their radar. They're paying attention, and so I think we're in a good spot. But I totally hear you, Dr. Glass. I appreciate your comments.
Well, thank you.
Diane, this is Paul Schreier. These questions raise the question for me: which city department do you think will be taking the lead on the 50-year resiliency planning for Minnesota Point? Is it the planning department or the parks department or some other department? I know the leadership has come from your department, but going forward, what department is going, to your knowledge, is going to take on the leadership for that?
Yeah, I think it'll stay in what we call PPL, which is Parks, Properties, and Libraries. So that's headed by Jim Philby Williams, because the city lands that are involved are public lands. Planning, we always will pull planning in, but I have only heard that the staffing will come from parks.
Okay, thank you.
But we try hard to work across our departments, and we do a good job with that. So where we need to pull in planners or the engineering team, you know, that will happen. You know, they may serve on some of the technical teams as we move forward with decision making and hearing back from the Section 111 group.
Are there any further questions or comments? Please don't hold back. We have a few minutes.
I have a question for Diane. Diane, is the outgoing person, do you have any advice for our community from what you've learned so far? What would your advice be to all of us in this process?
Paul's doing a great job. He's a good leader. So the Park Point Community Club is really, really important part of this, and the stakeholders are involved along the point. It's okay to stick with, to make calls to staff and make sure that they're working with you along the way. But I always say to everybody, listen first. Let's listen to each other and be open to something that may be totally different than what you're thinking right now.
All right, cool, thank you.
just a few more minutes. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I just have one final, first of all, a comment. Thank you very much, Diane, for your help and your guidance on this whole process. I really appreciate it. And I hope you stay involved in MP50 in the future. My question is a paradox that we sort of encountered. I think the impulse on the point is to respond to crises. And they've been primarily on both ends of the point, but they've been also on the bay side and other areas. And I think Hamilton Smith has done a really nice job of leading the short-term planning efforts for the point. That being said, we're also doing the long-term planning, which has to be done, that takes into account trends of climate change and also trends of just average annual erosion, which this year we probably won't have very much because the water level is so low. So we go through cycles, and the interest in dealing with this problem sort of waxes and wanes depending on the water level of the lake. So my question for you is, what is your advice for keeping the whole point in the scope of this project and keeping the long-term vision of it, rather than only reacting to sort of incidents and dealing with specific issues? And just asking for your advice on this for going forward. We wrote in that this covers all of Minnesota Point, and it's public land and private land and government land. I mean, there's a lot of diversity on this point. So do you have any advice going forward in terms of keeping the perspective of the entirety of the point in the scope of this project, even though we know it's extraordinarily difficult, complex?
I thought this was going to be a comment and not an ask for my advice on this. I think that I'm a planner. And the reason I am a planner is because I truly believe that putting out fires and reacting is cost ineffective and takes more time and energy and money than it does if you can strategize and try to implement a long-term vision. That said, there's no way we're going to get around crises or emergency responses. A storm can happen and all of a sudden everything has to be dropped and you're focused on something, that has to get done. So a percentage of that is just going to happen. And it's also human nature. But the more we can get away from the crisis management and moving toward a long-term vision, we're going to have to all check in too, even as you move through that long-term vision, because we might not be right. So the checks and balances are going to be important, but I'd like to believe it's going to be more cost efficient and effective for all of us moving forward.
Well, thank you for that comment and sort of humility in the face of how complex it is, and your comment that we'll probably be wrong and we'll discover things along the way. And I think you said that in this planning document, that this is a draft and it's going to continue to evolve as we work on this. But I appreciate that perspective from your point of view, because it really seems complex and it's changed over the years and it's continuing to change in unexpected ways.
Well, let me add to that, Paul, that we had a crisis on the point that we'd never experienced before, and that is an order to shelter in place. And if I want to remind you of that occurrence that was 2 or 3 years ago, sheltering in place on the point poses a variety of problems that nobody has ever thought about, particularly fire protection or ambulance protection or getting food. How do you shelter in place on an island when you can't go over the bridge? Those are the kind of things that I think we have to address in our long-term plan to find a way to deal with those issues. Sheltering in place.
Yes. Well, thank you, Gary. And I
Paul,
think that's going to go ahead. Go ahead,
yeah,
Don.
Paul, when you get a chance, Julie's got her hand up, it looks like.
Okay. Yeah. Julie, do you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to that a little because I actually just tuned into a training last week about resilience hubs in Baltimore, and it was just so interesting, but about in emergency situations in their whole community, what they have set up. It takes some long-term planning and preparation, but I think Gary's question and thought about kind of sheltering in place and how do we do that, I think it's logical to have connection with the emergency management community in Duluth to find out what they do have for existing plans, and if there is a big emergency where there's a shelter in place, whether you're talking about Lincoln Park or East Duluth or Minnesota Point, they likely have some things in place already, and it's kind of a bigger picture. And I realize you're focusing on Minnesota Point particularly, and then intersecting with some of us who have focused on other things. But I will say that as I'm working on some presentation materials for a forum next week, I keep reminded about this comment someone made: we are the ones we've been waiting for. So thank you for doing what you're doing. It isn't going to be anybody else outside of us who might be happenstance that somebody comes up with a implementation plan or develops resilience hubs, but we always have to kind of push forward with what we really want to have happen. So you are the ones, and we'll just keep moving it forward. But there may be some in place already, Gary, and if those need to be enhanced, that can be done.
Thank you, Julie. Well, Diane, any further comments, or are you ready to move on? Okay, I think we'll move to the next speaker, who's Nick Zager, who's the Chief Planning Branch for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Detroit office. And we're really happy to have him here and working on this project. I find that he too has been very receptive to questions and comments and input. Really, I want to thank you for that, Nick. And right from the beginning, when you responded to some questions and inquiry from Willis Matson, and then you had a meeting with a number of us, out of which the request came from the city. So thank you very much for being patient and being understanding. And quite frankly, we really look forward to working on this Section 111 study. As Don said, this is the third study, and I think you may allude to that. There are a few slides, and I'll let Don help set that up. And Nick, are you ready?
Thanks. So Paul, can you hear me?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thanks, Paul. I appreciate it. It's really been a pleasure working with everyone so far as we swing into this study. I know we have a lot of we have a pretty big footprint in Duluth as far as our operations and maintenance mission, in addition to our support for the US EPA. But this is kind of one of the first big studies that I've been involved in up here. So what I'm going to do here with the presentation, just kind of give again a little bit of background as far as the Section 111 authority, kind of dovetailing on the public meeting that we had. I think it was, I can't remember if it was October or November, where I kind of went over this a little bit to everybody in the city. So with that, again, my name's Nick Zager. I'm the chief of our planning branch here in the Army Corps of Engineers Detroit District. My job duties are basically, I oversee our outreach program, which is how we bring in work to the district, and our plan formulation mission. So when we think of plan formulation, it's the feasibility studies. It's determining federal interest in our projects to make sure that Congress is investing into projects that bring a federal interest to our nation and work responsibly with taxpayers' money. That's where we basically look at whether it's technically feasible, environmentally acceptable, and economically justified. I also oversee our environmental analysis mission. That would include all of our NEPA, so our environmental compliance, in addition to all of our tribal coordination and state historic preservation coordination as well. Pretty important missions. It allows us to partner very closely with the states and communities on a lot of different challenges, including up in the Duluth area. So looking forward to working with you all. Dawn, if you want to go to the next slide, please. Okay, so Section 111 is the authority that we're working under. It was enacted under what's called the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1968, and it's usually that was our authorizing bill back in the day. Our new authorizing bill is now called the Water Resources Development Act, WRDA. So that's how we get authority to do anything for the Corps of Engineers. And in order to break ground or construct anything, we need two things. We need an authorization and we need an appropriation. So in this case, what the Section 111 authority does, it's under our Continuing Authorities Program. The Continuing Authorities Program is a delegated authority to our headquarters to manage and, basically select the projects. We do have to route it through congressional committees, which is what took a while, but that's just for concurrence that they've seen it. That's part of the catch with their delegated authority. But the decision making basically comes at our headquarters level. What it does is the 111 authority basically looks at prevention or mitigation of damages caused by federal navigation works located on the Great Lakes and any of the ocean coasts. The damage incurred applies to both publicly and privately owned shores, and the prevention or mitigation projects are subject to cost sharing in the way that couple of different ways as far as cost sharing goes. It can be dependent on how the original project was constructed. So in this case, if Minnesota, the two structures, Superior Entry and Duluth Entry, were both constructed at 100% federal expense, so we wouldn't need to cost share anything if it was found that the structures were 100% at fault for all of the erosion on Minnesota Point. Now, if say we go into this study and we find out that 25% is caused by natural erosive processes, then we would have to cost share with the city or the state or whatever, or whoever would want to partner with us, and they would have to meet that 25% cost share in order to move forward with a project. For this Section 111 authority, the max federal cost that we can invest is $12.5 million, and then whatever's matched by the city. So $12.5 million is what the max that we can spend without getting a further authority from Congress to spend more money. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are kind of the high-level project milestones. So, the letter of request was mentioned earlier. That was sent to us from the city in coordination with Park Point and the other stakeholders. We were selected by headquarters to be a new start. After it cleared the congressional committees, we have received the initial $50,000 to do what we call a federal interest determination. It's basically a very high level view of what we do. We work with our division office to put together a short report to say that there is a federal interest in this project. And then what we do is the district does a briefing with our division office, presents our thoughts on the matter as far as whether there is a federal interest, and then they give us the thumbs up and we move into feasibility. We anticipate that this briefing will likely be at the end of February, and it's really more so we think that there is a federal interest here right now. We do have to go through our processes. Obviously, as it was mentioned earlier, there were 2 previous studies here. But this is part of our process. And then right now, we are coordinating with the city and Paul and some other folks in our working group to organize a charrette that'll basically kick off feasibility study, the feasibility portion of the report, or part of the process or project. So the feasibility study, we anticipate it's probably going to take about 18 to 24 months. There's a lot of coordination that goes along with that. And then following what comes out of the study, if it comes out with a recommended plan that's palatable to the city, then we could move into getting funding for design and implementation of the mitigation project. So that's kind of a high level of where we're looking at. There's still many steps from where we are now to getting the feasibility study approved. So that's where the timing lies right now. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so Paul had mentioned just a couple of questions that I thought I would address right off the bat, and then we have plenty of time that I can answer any other more detailed questions. So one of the questions is, who is leading the study? Well, it's under an Army Corps of Engineers authority, so we are leading the study. We assign a project manager to each project or each study. Mike Alice is an experienced project manager, and he'll be the PM for this. We also need a non-federal sponsor, and that is the City of Duluth. They were the ones that submitted the request, so they are officially our non-federal sponsor, with our main POCs being Jim Philby Williams and Diane Desotelle. So those are our primary POCs right now, with the city in the official capacity from a non-federal sponsor standpoint. The question was, how will the study build on the 2 previous Section 111 studies? Well, we've been mainly focusing on the 2001 study because that's more recent. And we are really using it as a foundation for our initial research. Our team here at the Corps has looked at it. We've shared it with the city to share to their experts, so they could review it prior to moving into feasibility. We want to be as open to ideas as possible. Right now, there probably are some valid alternatives from that 2001 study that will likely need to be reanalyzed, because I think we all know that the science has to be updated. Climate modeling, hydrodynamic modeling has come a very long way in over 20 years. That was a big reason that we thought that we had to reinitiate a new 111 study, was primarily because of the update in the science. Additional alternatives will likely be added during feasibility. This is just kind of the basis for where we start, and then through our charrette and through public comment and different things, gives us an idea of different ideas that are out there. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, but we do want to be open to new innovative alternatives. So we are very much open to things that meet our criteria. Again, those three questions need to be answered. Is it technically feasible? Is it economically viable? And is it environmentally acceptable? So all those things need to be answered as we find a potential solution. Next slide. Who approves the study? So the study is ultimately approved by our division commander. So that's our usually our 1-star or 2-star general at our division office. Right now, it's actually a colonel. Colonel Peoples is our commander right now. So she would ultimately approve the study if she was in command at that time. She may not. The study probably won't be approved for a couple of years. So we may have a new commanding general at that time. They kind of rotate out every 3 years. So, but the authority lies at our division office with our division commander. So I know that this was a big question, is what kind of opportunities will the Park Point community members have? So anytime the Corps of Engineers does anything, it requires at least one round of public comment. So right now, our process requires a 30-day public comment period after the feasibility study reaches the tentatively selected plan, or the TSP. So the TSP is basically, us as a team in partnership with the city and our core team basically does the alternatives analysis, steps through our process. And then the team comes to a point where we recommend a plan. And then it's at that time that we send the draft report out to the public, and they can comment on anything in the report, any of their suggestions on the tentatively selected plan, or any concerns that they have, whether it be environmental concerns, tribal concerns, any concerns that may be out there. Paul is obviously representing Park Point in our working groups. So Paul has been very vocal. He's voiced concerns. He's been very constructive, but he's been very collaborative in trying to, find a solution, understanding that Park Point is a very important stakeholder, but not the only stakeholder that we're dealing with. So Paul will be active. He will be representing Park Point. Like I said, he's been very vocal, very transparent in everything that he's done. So he's been really great to work with. And depending on what the city, how we work through the feasibility study, we'll work with the city to feel if there's, opportunities for public engagement, if they feel that it would be beneficial, depending on how we step through the process. If there's any, speed bumps you run into or those sorts of things, we can potentially talk about other avenues if further public engagements are needed at that time, anytime throughout the study. So I think that was kind of the 4 big ones that I wanted to address right off the bat. I think next slide, I think it's just to open up the floor for any questions. So I'll leave it open for questions right now.
Okay, thank you very much, Nick, for that overview. Maybe I'll kick it off with a question. As scientific information is collected, what is your recommendation for the way in which that information will be collected and made available to the public? If we went through 2 other studies, and a number of us have read the studies, and yet we're going, what is this based on? And the scientific information, some of it is buried and is not available. So as we go into this phase, what can be done? What's your suggestion for what can be done who should be hosting the scientific information and making sure that it's accurate and complete?
Yeah, so this is where, I mean, just to reassure everybody, I mean, the Corps of Engineers has many subject experts in the arena of coastal engineering. We have experts. We have a research facility down in Vicksburg, Mississippi, that's literally called the Coastal Hydraulics Laboratory. So we do have many experts. And since we're leading the study, the idea would be to collaborate with the city, their representatives, their technical experts. That's why we passed along the 2001 report, so they could share it with their experts, so that when we come together as a smaller group in the charrette, the idea would be, okay, we're going to put everything out on the table as far as what we think is useful for this. And then we'll identify data gaps, as in we have this historical information, but we need other information now. We need to go out and get sediment sampling, or we need to put wave gauges out, or whatever. And so the idea is we would be responsible for holding that information, because we're writing the study. But anything beyond that, I mean, when the study is completed, it's for the public. It's public. Since it was produced by the federal government, I mean, it's a public document. So anything within the study itself. So you have just to break it down in a little more detail, you have your main report, but then in addition to that, you have your appendices that are attached to it. So you'll have like an environmental appendix to talk about all the environmental compliance. You'll have an engineering appendix that'll talk about all the background, all the detail, all the data that they use, the assumptions that they use. All those sorts of things are going to be in these appendices that will be presented, during the public comment period, in addition to following it. So, we'll be using it in concert with the city and their technical experts. And then ultimately it's going to be released to whoever would want to see it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I want to open this up for other questions, comments. This is your chance. So it's nice to have Nick here. So please don't hold back. What questions are you thinking?
Gary Glass here. Am I recognized? Paul?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Nick, Gary Glass in Duluth. I've been involved in the Section 111 study for 2001, which really was focused a lot on the south end of Minnesota Point and not on the north end. And so I would implore you to include the other Section 111 study that was done in 1974, because it has some fundamentally useful data that is relevant to the Duluth Ship Canal at the north end of Minnesota Point. In particular, plates 5 and 6, where they reported out sampling the shoreline for the composition of the point, which is one of the major yet unresolved issues of how the point was formed. And it is a set of data that in its complete form would add a lot to the understanding of that question. And a little sample of it is given in the 1974 Section 111 study, showing the composition of the point being gravel for the first 1.5 miles. And 4 of the 14 samples are presented in that 1974 report, and we need to have the full report on those 14 core samples so that we can see the percent gravel that is making up the formation of Park Point, and also the core's photographs that they have of the day where the point is 100% gravel out to about the first mile. So I would encourage you to include the 74 report to your contractors, because it completes a much better picture of the Minnesota Point from both the north end and the south end.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you, Gary. I mean, it's those two structures have an impact on the dynamics of the point, and just seeing the federal interest determination document, which is a really short summary, you know, it recognizes that the 2001 report really did focus on you know, the southern portion and Superior Entry, and you know, mentioned yeah, I don't know this, I can't remember the specifics. I reviewed it a week or two ago about the characteristics of the point in understanding and tracing the geomorphology of the point. So yes, I agree with you that those we're you know, we're looking at any kind of historical documentation that we have, and so and then we're probably likely going to be getting more physical type of investigations out there as well. You know, we have an expert, our expert here at the Corps, Dr. Jim Selligan. He's not only an expert in coastal hydraulics, but he's also river hydraulics and geomorphology. So he's really trying to get to the root of it. In addition to Diane, I'm sorry, I forgot his name, from University of Minnesota.
Yeah.
That's helping us.
Dr. John Swenson's, he and
Yeah.
Jim Seligren are in good communication with each other as we help get ready for the charrette. So.
Okay, yeah, great. So Dr. Swenson, yep.
So that there's no question that the structure has stopped the migration of the gravel from the North Shore onto the point, and the impact of that has been mediated by the amount of dredge spoils put on the beach to supplement what's on the point, and it is really a issue of how you deal with the whole question as a mitigation solution in the future. Whether you try to reproduce what nature has provided, or do you try to intervene with geotubes or something that is doable. So, but to answer the fundamental question of how the point was formed and how much gravel from the North Shore continuously contributed to that would be a very important part of your study. And it has not been done yet. So I would encourage you to do that part.
Yeah, I mean, the whole purpose of this Section 111 authority is to get at the root of what impact the federal structures are having. So it's like, if we take out the structures, if they were never built,
right there,
what would the shoreline look like? I mean, so that's at the root of what we're trying to do.
Great, fantastic, good to hear. Thank you.
And I think I saw Willis had his hand up. Willis, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, thank you. And first of all, my appreciation to you, Nick, and the Corps for recognizing the need to update the application of modern technology to what's going on Minnesota Point. I think there's much has been learned over time, and that much new can now be considered as reasonable alternatives that was not even available before. So thank you for opening this up and taking the wider view. To add to what Gary Glass was pointing out, I think everyone is becoming more and more aware of the fluvial dynamics in the interference that was caused by the breakwaters on the lakeside. What is less known is, I believe, the fluvial geomorphologic impacts of the harbor itself. The harbor prior to the federal facility was a shallow marsh, is what's normally accompanies these barrier islands, and having been deepened changes a great deal of what happens to sediment and wave action on the backside of the island. So I'm hoping that the scoping of this study will not only look at the breakwater impacts, but the interruption of natural sediment, fluvial sediment dynamics of the harbor, and what that does to the stability of Minnesota Point and many of the other environmental impacts we'll have. For example, there's significant wave erosion on the harbor side that would not or could not have happened under the shallow water conditions that was made possible by the deepening of the harbor. And then the sediment trapping function of the harbor was, of course, increased significantly as you increase the volume and slow the water and increase the residence time on the harbor side. Then the flux of sediment and materials from the harbor in and out of the lake as you have lake sesh movement as the water goes both ways through those two entries. Those changes in dynamics all are influenced by the presence of and the influence of the federal facility. So hopefully the scope of the 111 study will look at the lakeside breakwater impacts, as well as what were the impacts of the deepening of the harbor and the fluvial geomorphological changes that followed that in the decades since that harbor was deepened. So those are the kinds of things we'll be looking for. By the way, greetings from Brad Gausman, who was not able to join us, representing the coalition of conservation and environmental groups that wants to be at the table representing the interests of Lake Superior itself. We want to be sure that the lake has a voice, and we hope that Brad and I can bring the voice of Lake Superior concerns, the ecology of Lake Superior, and the users of Lake Superior to the table as we go forward with the study. So thanks for letting us be at the table and have that voice.
Yeah, well, let's just to kind of answer your question. I'll be honest. I mean, the study is mainly going to primarily focused on the impacts of the structures. That's what our authority kind of limits it to. It's a coastal type of authority that looks at mitigation for damages of shoreline. So the actual deepening of the harbor. I mean, I'd have to look at the very details of the authority, but it's likely going to more focus on the damage that is being caused on the Lake Superior side of the harbor.
Yeah, I understand that's been the primary focus. I was just hoping we wouldn't lose track that there are these secondary impacts on shore on the bay side. That should be at least examined, acknowledged, that maybe not be the primary focus of this, but the barrier island is actually being attacked from both sides as a result of changes attributable to the federal facility that is the harbor. No, it's not structural per se in that it wasn't concrete and rock, but nevertheless it was changed to the morphology. So hopefully that'll be at least understood.
And that may be something that comes out of this as kind of an ancillary. I mean, it may be something that we have to look at under a different authority, because you're also talking about the operation of our harbor there. And, you know, we have different authorities. We have different authorities that can address, okay, there's been a change in condition that we would need to look into modifying how the harbor is configured, you know, or how our nav channel is configured. And so that would likely be under a different authority as to that, but it could. I mean, we're going to be doing a lot of hydrodynamics and geomorphology type of work on this, so it may tease out, you know, another opportunity to study something further and look for other ways in the future.
Yeah, it's a good thing to point out that, you know, the Corps has the facilities itself, and then you have your operational branches that are maintaining. And the public looks at how the Corps integrates those two activities of a federal activity on a public water. So hopefully there will be an ongoing exchange of information of who is in charge of what's the overall impact of the federal presence in the Duluth Harbor. So I appreciate you explaining how that's divided between an operational function of the Corps as well as, you know, looking at the structure. So thanks for pointing that out. We'll look for ways that those can be, you know, brought into the discussion so that the two arms of our federal government are working to to maintain the integrity of Lake Superior. So thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, and just to clarify, yeah, I'm in planning, and we have our operations division, but we all report to our commander, the Detroit District Commander. So it's how we work together. Operations is looking short term, planning is looking long term. So we do work really closely together on that. And it sometimes comes down to what our commander or commanding general has to say as far as which direction we go. So I did see Charlene had a question.
Yes, thank you. Working with technology here. Yeah, I'm a sort of a newcomer to this process, and getting up to speed. Science is not my natural area of expertise. I'm a historian. And before I forget it, I wanted to mention that the Blatnick Bridge, of course, is under consideration right now by the state DOTs and the federal government as to what to do with it. It's 60 years old, and there might be some studies that are being done for that bridge project that might be relevant to some of the things we're concerned about for this work. So I just encourage you to check in with them and see if they have anything. One thing I know they do have something on are the cultural resources, and that's my specialty. I know that the focus of the study is really scientific, but there are a lot of cultural resources in the area and potentially along the shoreline. And I've spent a lot of my career dealing with Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act and the implementation of that. And you mentioned that you coordinate with the State Historic Preservation Office, which if you've done it much in Minnesota, you know that they're not the easiest people to deal with. They're pretty, well, what can I say? Strict, conservative. And I'm wondering how you're thinking they're going to be involved with this. And I wasn't quite sure whether this should go with the whole part of the planning process, but I'm wondering if you think it would be advisable for like the city's technical advisory group to have somebody who understands preservation issues as part of that group.
Yep, Charlene, thanks for the question. Actually, 106 is required. I mean, we're going to be doing 106 on this project. I have two archaeologists that work for me. One is actually our regional technical specialist. So he's the expert for our division when it comes to cultural resources and archaeology. We work, because of our O&M mission up there, we work very closely with the tribes for anything that's going on the point. And we do work very closely with the State Historic Preservation Office, simply because of all the historic structures that we have out there. We just had to go through something, our vessel yard, which is on the harbor side of things. We had to, it sustained some damages from a storm a few years ago, and we had to work through that just to have steel sheet pile, installed, buildings updated, that sort of stuff. So we have close working relationships with the tribes and with the state. So Kurt Solacek is my main senior archaeologist. And if you have, or you or anybody on Park Point has any concerns, you can send them directly to Paul and you can get them to me, or if you have any other tribal or cultural questions, we will have an expert on the team.
Okay, thank you. Would you suggest that the city does that as well? Or, I mean, how big an issue do you think cultural resources will be with this report?
It'll be just as important as any of the other issues that we're looking at. When I say environmentally acceptable, I kind of put 106 and tribal kind of under that umbrella as well. I mean, we have projects that are really driven by those types of issues rather than the technical challenges that we're dealing with. So we developed in our project what's called a risk register, and it gives all the risks and it assigns low, moderate, high risks. And some of those risks can be tribal related or cultural related or SHPO related. So the weight, it weighs the same as the technical parts of this project.
Okay, great. Thanks for that explanation.
Charlene, I think too that this will carry over from the science that Nick's doing to the planning part. And that's where we need to, as we move forward with actually planning, if we hire a contractor, however it happens, that we make sure that the team, the technical team that we use, or the steering type committee team that we do use, which is usually a smaller group, that we make sure that the representation is good, and we'll be working with the city and probably Alicia Kowalski or whatever to make sure that we have the right people from the Indigenous Commission involved and aware of what's going on. So we're always thinking about who we need, which commissions we need to update folks on so they know what's going on, for one, and then making sure we're getting feedback. And all those commission meetings being open to the public is also useful because it gives people an opportunity to comment and talk or bring up things that, you know, maybe we didn't know about.
Okay, well, that's super. Yeah, because I know that whole process, the historic stuff can trip up a process along the way. And I just hate when that happens because it hasn't been considered earlier. So I'm glad to hear it's being considered early in the process.
Yeah, thanks. Good comments.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions out there?
Yeah, I have one. Can you hear me?
I got you.
Yeah, Dan O'Neill. I'm actually just getting introduced to what's going on here with this group and all that. I haven't taken part in anything to speak of, but pertaining to your second slide, I believe, when when it was talking about the maximum 12.5 million, correct? So
Yes.
when you mentioned that, you also mentioned something about a match with the city. So could you explain that to me a little bit? I probably should know this, and probably everybody else does, but could you explain that just a little bit when you mentioned match from the city?
Yeah. So the way this authority works is we're ultimately looking at what are the damages caused by the federal navigation works. Okay, so the damage on the point, in theory, there's probably a combination of causes for the damage. When we all know that we've had higher lake levels, more intense storms, that kind of stuff. But what we're trying to get to the root of is what is the impact of the federal structure on those adjacent shorelines. So say, for instance, we go through the study and we find out that 75% of the damage that is caused on the point or to the other adjacent areas is the fault of our structures, then we would pay that 75%. And then the 25% that was attributable to high water levels, intense storms, that sort of stuff, would have to be cost shared with the city or the state or the county or whatever non-federal entity is willing to partner with us to fund it. Our statute for the amount that we can invest is $12.5 million. If the project goes beyond that, where the federal government is required to invest more funding, we would usually need a specific authorization from Congress for that.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that explanation.
Let's see, I would like to follow up. Thank you, Dan, for asking that question. And it's my understanding that in the 2001 study, it was recommending 13 million in damages, which was beyond the 12.5. And in a way that became an obstacle because then it's a whole new set of federal legislative processes. So 12.5 million doesn't seem like very much. And if 20 years ago it was already 13 million, Nick, how do you reconcile that in terms of the approach this time, so that we don't see that that doesn't become an obstacle. It becomes something that we prepare for and we can handle. Because again, the 12 million didn't seems like this time it probably, even with inflation, it's going to be more than that.
Yeah, and it depends on what, what the alternative is that we look at. So, I mean, that's a good point, Paul. I guess what we do is we're not going to work in a vacuum and wait till the end of the process or the study to figure out whether our cost estimate is going to likely blow the authorized limit. So, as we move in and we run through these alternatives and we see that there's an option that would end up costing the federal government, say $20 million or something like that, we're going to have to start socializing that with our higher headquarters and likely our congressional delegation. And I would hope that, the study is probably going to take, like I said, 1.5 to 2 years. I would like to hope midway through the study, we would be able to identify a risk like that, where we could potentially then start doing outreach to inform our congressional delegation as to whether they need to take some sort of action. I mean, ultimately, they could change the authority if they like. So I think it's just about staying ahead of it right now, because it is a valid concern, but we're not going to know that until we step through the initial process.
This is well, if I can follow up on that, when I read the 2002 study and the estimated cost, the exceedance going to $13+ million was based on a 50-year projection of cost of the various remedy preferred in that. And I'm wondering how that 50-year time frame was chosen, because it seemed to me if it had been a 25-year, it would have fallen below the 12.5 million. So is that the 50-year time frame, $12.5 million, somewhere in statute or rule or policy? How do you arrive at the total cost and the annual multiplier that led to that $13 million in the last study? I couldn't understand how that was done.
Yeah, well, typically our structures are designed for a 50-year life. That's where that comes from. Ultimately, if it were up, if it's economically acceptable, we would prefer to do something where we fix the problem and we don't have to keep coming back every few years and doing something. I mean, it may end up being beach nourishment, maybe end up being the solution. So it's 50 years is what we typically require for any of our structures when we're doing, we're designing a breakwater, a miter gate for a lock, a dam, anything like that. Our life, is typically 50 years. Now we tend to get away from those, with the way our engineering has kind of evolved over the past couple of decades. We look more for risk. We look more at exceedance probabilities rather than saying 50-year life kind of thing. So it's much more from a probabilistic standpoint than just saying, okay, what's the 50-year life of this? So it's definitely something that we're going to have to talk through, and that's how our planning process kind of works. It's an iterative process. It's like, okay, we go through something, we identify a risk. Do we need to look back at it? What else do we need to do? So it's very much an iterative process that gets us to our ultimate recommended plan.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. I just didn't understand how that was done, because it seemed like it was on a sliding scale. Whereas if the upfront cost had been like $10 million in the first year, that first study, it might have been something you could have gone ahead with. But tripping it after 50 years just kind of seemed like it was the stop point in it. So thanks for helping clarify that.
Yeah, and those costs would have had to been escalated if we were projecting it out 50 years. So that could have impacted the cost. You're right with that.
Yeah.
Well, Nick, I want to thank you very much. I know we're reaching the end of our time. So are there any final comments you or Diane have at this time? I want to thank both of you for speaking and for responding to questions and even offering your opinions on this. And then also I want to thank everybody who's attended for asking questions. We will keep this dialogue going. You know, I certainly want to communicate the process that we're going through to the community and to communicate it both directions. But any final comments? Nick?
No, I appreciate the time. Again, Paul has been great to work with as an advocate for Park Point, and he's basically been sending me questions. So feel free to work through Paul, you know, as far as your questions go or your concerns, and he'll be involved with the smaller working groups. So I appreciate the time, and again, we're trying to be as transparent as we can while, you know, making sure that we don't get too many cooks in the kitchen. That's why we have our smaller working group. So so just keep being vocal, and you know, we'll do our best to answer anything we can. We do have authorities that we're required to work in. So you know, keep that in mind as well. So I do appreciate the time, and again, if anything else comes up, you know, Paul's our guy. He'll let me know. Thanks.
Thank you, Nick. And Diane, really appreciate working with you on MP50 and on the city project. Any final comments or?
Just wanted to let you know, I'll be really working hard with the Corps and getting this charrette set up and continuing that good communication with you. My position is being filled at hopefully before I leave. So we'll see that we can make a good transition. Second, for those of you who are wondering if there's going to be any beach nourishment this year on Park Point, there will not. The city will not be requesting any beach nourishment. The Corps does have places to put the material, which is good, and there's some good projects going on out there. We aren't projecting 2023, but I think we're in a good stead, and we're in a good spot now where we can start this planning and this hard work, and not have to focus on a short-term fix right now.
Thank you so much for your support on this. Send me questions, comments through email. I'll communicate it to the appropriate people. Dawn, thanks for hosting the meeting.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Really appreciate it. It is being recorded, so we'll make it available to the broader community. I know some people couldn't attend. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.